July, Tynwald narrowly avoided running into a fourth day, so this is our second look back at that sitting. We'll hear later about climate change progress and the Chief Constable's report. There's also the mystery case of when is Council of Ministers' collective responsibility not Council of Ministers' collective responsibility, as well as a good bit of politicking which will help those in most need of government support. But first, there was a lively protest outside of Tynwald from people opposed to the Moorvannon wind farm.
Hi, Ian Strafford from Laxey.
And you've got a fair number of people here this morning.
Yeah, I think it's a great turnout, and I think it represents the strength of feeling on the island with respect to the Moorvannon offshore wind farm. Trying to speak over the cars there, and the strength of feeling of people who do not want to have this wind farm. There are, what would you say, 60, 70 people here today. I don't know, were there more earlier? So we kind of been here since about 11:30. It's now 1:45. And yeah, this is the kind of number of people that some people are coming and staying for sort of half an hour and then going on about their business sort of thing. And others are coming in to join us as we go through the next hour or so. So I think what we're seeing is it's not a static 60 people. There's plenty of people that are coming to show their support, but not necessarily just support, but also to show their thoughts on the Moorvannon wind farm.
There are, though, 86,000, something like that, people living on the island. Is this reflective of a much broader part of the community, and if so, why aren't there more people here?
Well, I think in terms of reflective of a broader amount of the community of the Isle of Man, I think we need to recognise now that we're over 10,000 people that have signed a petition. There hasn't been a stronger show, public mandate, if you like, really, in terms of people not wanting to have Moorvannon. And I think that is really showing that the debate's actually moved on now. This is no longer just about the technicalities of what little benefit might I get here or what disbenefit I might get. We're now moving to a position which is, and this is a message really for the new MHKs and the new Tynwald that comes in September, which is, are you going to listen to actually the views of the electorate now? It's no longer about waiting to see what the examining body may or may not say. It is becoming clear that the Manx people have worked out what they want and whether they're going to be listened to.
And the process that exists, does that process allow for public opinion, or is it purely about looking at all the evidence as to environmental risk and benefits to the island, those sorts of things? Does it actually allow for the majority of the people, assuming that that's what we have, the majority of the people of the island don't support this?
Well, I think it's important to think through that process. So there has been 3 public meetings. Those public meetings have allowed people to put, in the examining body's words, to put evidence in. And the examining body are taking as evidence people's thoughts, people's feelings. They have been asked, how will this impact on your feelings and how you appreciate your island and where you live? So that in itself, it's not scientific evidence, but it is evidence. It is things which need to be taken into account. And the examining board have said they will take that into account. But obviously a lot of it is very much focused around the scientific assessment and the balances that will be made. But I think also it's important that there is the scientific side of this, but then there's also the political side of this. The new Comin will make a decision, and we hope that in making that decision they will also reflect very strongly on what the feelings are of the Manx people and what they want for their island. And as I said, the debate's moved on. This isn't just about, will I get 1 job, 2 jobs, 30 jobs? We don't know what it is. But the key bit is the Manx people are making their feelings known, and it is important that their elected representatives recognise and understand what that feeling is and represent that feeling back in Tynwald.
Why do you think what we must presume it to be a supporter of the Moorvannon wind farm, Dr. Allinson, why do you think he would open up what appeared to be the opening up, at least, of a can of worms in his evidence to the hearing?
I think that's a very good question, and probably one which Dr. Allinson is best to answer. I was there at the hearing when Dr. Allinson stood up and made his submission to the inquiry. It came across as though he wanted to provide his background, his knowledge, and his support for the wind farm. I think a number of people, once they've understood Dr. Allison's view of what the true intention has been of the government since maybe 2015 or whenever we started this process, and what we have and what we have viewed through DEFRA documents that we've always suspected to be the case, which is Moor Vannin was considered to be the first of many offshore wind farms or leases. But obviously Dr. Allinson will be able to explain why he did what he did, but we obviously also saw that the Chief Minister responded very quickly to that, wanting to maybe temper what Dr. Allinson had said.
That was protester Ian Strafford. So why did Alex Allinson make his incendiary intervention?
The invitation went out to everyone on the island, but also to political members, MHKs, about joining in with the last sessions. And then the last one on Friday was particularly about the economic aspects of an offshore wind farm. I think, obviously, you've covered some of the restrictions put on ministers or members who may end up having to be deciders of this eventual recommendation that comes from the independent panel. And so I think when you look at some of the coverage of the evidence being given to the panel, it has been lacking one key crucial part, which is quite basic. What's in it for people on the Isle of Man? What are they going to get from a wind farm? And actually, that was one of the comments made by the panel chair, that they wanted more information from government, what the benefits would be for those people who are disadvantaged by having their view of the Irish Sea ruined, perhaps, by large windmills. And so I thought, as Treasury Minister and as previous Department for Enterprise Minister, who played a part in drawing up the economic strategy, who looked at all the evidence presented to us about various ways of increasing the prosperity for the people of the Isle of Man, it was a chance for me to try to give that different perspective. So it wasn't meant to be incendiary, it wasn't meant to be disrespectful for those who oppose offshore wind farms. I completely understand their arguments, but it was trying to present some evidence about why this was part of the economic strategy that was overwhelmingly supported by Tynwald at the start of this administration.
I suppose the reason I describe it as incendiary is at the moment this is a campaign against the wind farm anyway, is largely being led by residents who are going to be most affected or whose views are going to be most affected by it. By your intervention, you opened up the prospect that this is a test case. This is the first of what could be many wind farms all around the island. I think that I know you well enough to know that you're probably quite supportive of wind farms. And effectively what you've done is you've united opposition across the island.
I don't think I have, because, again, yes, there is a very vocal opposition to offshore wind farms, but there's also a large number of people who see the benefits of this, not only in terms of the economic benefits, in terms of jobs, in terms of money coming in, but the very essence of the climate change emergency that was declared in the previous administration, and the fact that we still haven't delivered that reliability, sustainability, and our own energy security. And this is a way we could do that by using the expertise of a private provider. And I was being honest. I'm afraid that when the Council of Ministers, the Economic Strategy Board, looked at the benefits of offshore wind, which were well put out by KPMG in some of their evidence reports for the economic strategy, it was seen that if we could get a route to market, if we could prove the concept of a large offshore wind development within Isle of Man territorial waters, where we got the benefits financially from that there were other areas around the islands that could similarly have offshore wind farms in them. And that's why DEFRA have been looking at marine spatial planning, why that's all going ahead, and we've had a number of of motions about that today in terms of developing our territorial waters for the advantage of the people who live on the Isle of Man. So again, I don't think it's necessarily uniting concerns about offshore wind farms. Those concerns are there, they're very valid, and they're shared with many people who live on coastlines. But what it is doing is trying to show the overall economic potential of capitalising on the development of our territorial waters and the significant benefits that could bring in the future to our island's economy.
Do you think that this administration and the previous administration did enough in terms of preparing the ground in relation to the likelihood that parts of our territorial sea were going to be developed for energy production purposes, whether that be gas, wind farms, tidal power? Do you think enough was done?
No, would be the answer to that. And I think we're seeing that now with some very valid concerns being brought up at a time that there is, in effect, a planning application going in to doing it. I think there was a lot more potential for explaining the benefits and also the risks of this sort of development, whether it be drilling for gas or whether it be putting up offshore windmills. If you're going to do that major infrastructure development, if you're going to change some of the physical character of the Isle of Man, I think people need to be led along a pathway that explains those risks, those benefits, the pros and cons of that, so that they can make up their own mind. And their own mind may be that they oppose windmills, onshore or offshore, or they may decide that actually the inconvenience of that and some of the risks involved are worth paying for the benefits it will bring, not just to the island economy, but also in terms of decarbonisation and the laws we pass beforehand to reduce our carbon emissions and go net zero by 2050.
In terms then of those benefits, is it 50 million, something like that, is the expected benefit to the Manx Exchequer every year for the next, for the 30 odd years of the lifetime of the development. Is that enough?
What the Economic Advisory Division of Treasury have done is submitted to the inquiry their own analysis of Orsted's projections, and they agree that it would raise around about £40 million per year for the next 30 years. Now, is that enough? Was one of the questions that is being posed by the committee, the independent panel that's looking into it. In terms of planning, is the inconvenience and the disruption that it may be seen to cause local residents, is that enough compensation for them? And further to that, where does that money go? Is that money just swallowed up in the great morass that is government finances, or is it earmarked to improve the livelihoods of people on the Isle of Man? And that comes back to some of the key parts of the economic strategy, but also the island plan, that it would everything that government does shouldn't just be about paying bills and increasing bills. It should be about increasing the prosperity for the people who live on the island. So my evidence that I gave, stood up and made a speech, and then they asked me for it in writing, was purely to present that viewpoint, that I think that there is evidence that this could contribute significantly to the Isle of Man economy now and potentially in the future, and that has merit. But that doesn't necessarily steamroll over any of the concerns that were also presented by local residents, including in my own constituency.
Those who oppose the wind farm have a view that this is a done deal and it doesn't really matter what anyone says now. Council Ministers is going to approve this. Is that true, what they think, or is there an opportunity for Council Ministers, either based on the evidence or based on the political reality after the election, assuming that the anti-side are right and that there's significant opposition to this across the island, is there a possibility for council ministers to make the political decision and say, we're just not going to go with this, even though the evidence presented and the amendments and suggested changes could deliver something good for the island?
Absolutely. This is going to be a democratic decision. I think in the election in September, some of my ministerial colleagues and some of my colleagues who want to be ministers in the future do feel a bit confined because they've been told by the Attorney General that if they express a strong opinion for or against, then they may not be in the room to make that decision. I think it's absolutely right that people say, I want to be a minister. I want to actually represent my constituents in the best way possible over this decision. And for that reason, I can't actually express a preference for and against. I've heard that some people have said, I won't vote for you if you vote for or if you say you are in favour. Again, as a minister, you have to be very careful because this will come down to the council of ministers. They will have to make the decision based on what's best for the country, irrespective of what the independent panel say. They will take that on board, but they have to make the right decision for our country, and they also have to decide in terms of bringing it for ratification by Tynwald as a whole, because a large offshore wind farm will be the largest and most significant infrastructure development the island has ever seen. I don't know whether there were complaints about the Laxey Wheel when that was built. I'm sure there were people saying it was too large. That's dwarfed in comparison with this development. So I think it's absolutely right that the council ministers make the right decision and have the right people around the table to make the right decision in the interests of the Isle of Man people.
Ramsey MHK, Alex Allenton. Next, Michelle Haywood had a question for the Chief Minister. It's quite an important question when it comes to particularly the fact we're having an election very shortly and helping the public understand how things work. There is a thing called collective responsibility in Council of Ministers, but that only seemed to last part way through a motion last month in relation to the budget process, and then it seemed to just completely disappear in front of our eyes.
Yeah, the Select Committee on Budget Reform made 25 recommendations, of which Comin were going to amend 17 of them. And they lost the amendment on the first recommendation, and so the recommendation as it stood was voted through. And then by the time we got to about the 7th recommendation, the collective responsibility seemed to fall down. So at various parts then after, out of those 17 motions that Comin lost, they had ministers voting different ways to the rest of Comin on 7 of the original recommendations. So any concept of collective responsibility had clearly disappeared out the window. I think there's a couple of explanations. I think some of the recommendations as they stood were probably quite sensible, and I think members then faced with not having the Comin amendment through probably looked at it and went, why would I vote against that? That's ridiculous, and switched their vote. I'm not sure what the Teams chat between ministers looked like, but I bet it was red hot at the time. And then I think there were parts of it that just signal that they hadn't considered what happens if we lose the amendments, and I think that's a level of arrogance on behalf of Council of Ministers. They provided the ministers with the recommended voting and the little aid memoir of which one to go for, and not considered that if the rest of Tynwald didn't like that, effectively it was a kick it into the long grass amendment that they were trying to move. If the rest of Tynwald didn't like that, what came next? And I just don't think they'd considered that eventuality. Now, whether that's the weight of work that they got to get through, they'd done it at speed, whether it's the advising department, which I'm guessing in this case would have been Treasury, if Treasury didn't provide clear guidance for ministers over what to do. But clearly the collective responsibility just deteriorated at that point and it became a bit of a free-for-all.
And I guess Council of Ministers would say it was gently moving it into slightly longer grasp. It wasn't an entirely open-ended, this is gone completely. It was just giving them a bit more time to consider things.
It was giving them time to come back with another report on it, which I think would have just been another talking shop, whereas the original recommendations actually had timelines for implementing things. And so I think there's a real difference between a recommendation that says, I'm going to do something, and somebody says, well, I'm going to amend that, so we'll report about that in somewhere between March and October next year. I do feel like that is a kick it into the long grass. That's a buy yourself a long period of time and not commit to actually delivering anything.
And the Chief Minister, in answer to your question, was robust. And yes, of course, we have clear processes in place and all the ministers were following collective responsibility. You're obviously not convinced.
Well, no, he managed to, when I asked my supplementary questions, just say collective responsibility applies to the Council of Ministers, and repeat that line and wouldn't actually answer the question. I think it's quite clear that he had lost control of his Council of Ministers during that debate, and I'm not sure what they will have done to discuss it afterwards and what happened or how they've reflected on it. But the Chief Minister clearly wasn't in control of his council.
Moving on then, one of your colleagues was suggesting in the debate about the Climate Change Transformation Team's report that it just seemed quite bizarre that departments weren't taking their responsibilities seriously enough. Is that something you noticed when you were a minister? Do you notice that when you're in departments?
Yeah, I think you do. I think when I was in health, I remember having discussions with Manx Care about energy reduction, them saying, well, it doesn't matter because we don't pay our bill. And because the bills all come through DOI for energy, there's no incentive on departments or other government bodies to change their behaviours in order to reduce their energy usage, and I think that's an unfortunate thing. And we heard from the Minister today that she wants that billing moved into the department, so you actually have to deal with your own bill. And if you're paying your own bill, you tend to focus a little bit more on reducing it where you can. I think if I reflect on my time during DOI, I did meet with the climate change team, and we started talking about whether we could move the bus fleet onto HVO, whether there would be some transformation funding perhaps to smooth, because it's more expensive as a fuel, but it would mean that we could have decarbonised the entire bus fleet. And it would also mean that government, being a large purchaser of fuel, made bringing that volume of fuel to the island more cost effective, and would be leading the way in saying, look, pending whatever happens with bus technologies, and I think the jury is still slightly out on that, but actually if we move to having HVO in the buses, which they're all capable of taking, we would have decarbonised our bus fleet and the government fleet in one step, and it's one easy step that I think needs to be explored.
And HVO, for the ignorant?
It's a manufactured diesel, effectively, so it's a diesel replacement, so from vegetable oils.
Do you have some sympathy for the Minister? Because, she does often feel, this is not the first time, feel a little beleaguered in trying to defend the progress. It's not been fast, has it?
I think it's fine. You can go back and people say, well, we declared a climate change emergency, what have we done since? I think there was such a gap in information at that point. It is taken a fair amount of time to get up and running, to start filling in those gaps and to start finding some sort of base level that we can work from. Most of the spending that's gone into climate change has gone into making houses warmer and insulating them and reducing people's energy bill, and that's all fine. And the new home heat scheme that's coming through, I think that's got real potential to start reducing those bills further and reducing fossil fuel use even further. We're also spending huge amounts on adaptation, so we're spending large amounts on flood mitigation and flood prevention as well, and trying to work through all of those. But I think for every government body, I think we're still trying to understand what the implications will be. I know if you talk to Manx Utilities, the fact that the rainfall patterns are changing means their usual levels in reservoirs are not what they've expected for the last 30 years. They're having to readjust their baselines in order to work out how to manage those water resources sensibly going forward. So I think for all of us, it will just become an ongoing problem that we will have to deal with, this constant response to trying to find the right mitigations to put in place.
Russian MHK Michelle Hayward. Next, the DEFRA Minister. You were back with a Climate Change Transformation Board or team report. So what has been achieved in the past 4 years? Because I think last year there was some suggestion that maybe not enough was getting done.
I talked about the fact the reporting is just a mandatory part of the law, so it's the work that goes on behind the scenes. This is always the case, and a lot of the conversation this time was around, okay, well, you've got the report, you've been able to report, but what's the delivery? But there have been some really positive schemes. So we've had the Green Living Grant scheme, we're obviously also had the Energy Efficiency scheme, both of which have had a huge reach across island homes, and that money represents around 81% of the total spend that we've had against the Climate Change Fund. So when people talk about all this money that's been, just spent willy-nilly or however they might put it, 81% of that money has gone directly into properties on our island, and I think that's a really good news story, especially when we want to make sure that we're reducing emissions, because we're reducing heat from escaping from properties. We're also making sure that people are in warmer, warmer homes, and I think that's really important, especially at a time when we know we get colder winters and warmer summers. We're also then, we have the Heatwise Home Scheme that we have on the order paper for later in this sitting. So there's been a huge amount of work in pulling that together. We've also got stuff we've done around peatland restoration. There's a huge project going on with that, which is actually brilliant if anyone gets the opportunity to go up and have a look at the work that's going on up on the mountain.
And there's good, the other good things, in terms of insulating homes, obviously people then pay less money because they have cheaper energy bills. In terms of the peatland restoration, that keeps the water for a longer period up in the mountains and hopefully reduces the impact of flash floods and the like.
Absolutely, and I think that's the thing that's so exciting actually when we look at all of the things that we do under the guise of climate change. Actually, the co-benefits are huge. So as you say, protecting against that global energy volatility, and we've seen that. In the last 5-6 years, when something happens internationally that we have no control over, and we will not have any control over, it's absolutely out with our ability to influence global wars or economic shifts outside of our jurisdiction. But what we can do is we can make sure that the amount of energy people need to use is reduced, and we can look to support changes within the fabric of people's buildings that make their own living situation better, because they're not spending money heating the environment around them, they're actually heating their own property, and I think that's so important. And as you say, we've got peatland restoration, again a brilliant story in terms of retaining the water in the peat in a manageable way, so it's not just rolling over the top of degraded peatland and washing more away and causing more damage. We're protecting the carbon stores, and at the same time we're preventing that flash flooding, as you say. And we talk a lot about the work that our farmers are doing, and so much of the positive work they do, not only in providing food to our island, but in also managing our landscapes and in managing flood prevention and managing our that security we have through managing hedgerows and through managing the grasslands and all of that fabric of our countryside. So it's just such a bigger story than the one sort of headline thing I think people see. We've also had some other good news stories in the Blue Carbon project, so that's nearly coming to an end. The actual research element is there, and we're just pulling together all of the final data. And at the minute, we've got some closed areas. Those are trials at present. And what's been seen is where we've protected in those areas, the langoustines that have been caught have increased in size significantly. So the per kilogram value of those langoustines is now significantly more. So catching less, but making more money, and all while damaging our seabeds has been reduced. And that's, again, 3 good news stories for one project. And I think those are the stories we need to be talking about on our island.
And things like the Blue Carbon project includes restoration or assistance to things like kelp beds, which then reduces coastal erosion, which again is a pretty positive thing.
Yeah, and there's just so much. Actually, anyone who gets the chance to read the Blue Carbon report, even if you look at the pictures, actually, I think it really does tell a story just about how vibrant our underwater spaces are around our island. And there's something that most of us don't get an opportunity to see. If you're not a diver, if you're not someone who goes out, I think you almost assume what might be under there. But actually, there's this rich wildlife that's existing, both in terms of plants and other species that are existing in our seabed. And thriving, and we're seeing that where we have those protected areas, as you'd expect, we're seeing actually those areas grow and extend, and seagrass areas, seabeds, the merle, presence of merle down there as well. And the photographs, when you start to understand what those things are and actually the benefit that they bring, it's really significant. So sometimes it's the stuff we can't see as much as it is the things that we can see that are benefiting us.
The summer that we've just had probably will impact on people's views about climate change, or some people's views at least. I think those who are sceptical about climate change would often say, well, if it means we're going to get slightly warmer summers, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Anyone living through the heat of the last few weeks might well be thinking, you know what, maybe that's just a bit too hot.
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes it's easy for us to think about something, how it might benefit me right now, but actually I also need to think about how it affects the older older constituents, of our island, the people who are more vulnerable, who can't get themselves out of that heat, whose buildings haven't had that fabric benefit in terms of being able to shield themselves, who've got health conditions that are exacerbated by excess heat and just aren't in a position to be able to manage that. And there's no question, when you look globally, the increases in the heat do lead to heat-related illness and, in fact, death. That's unavoidable, and we have the same thing when we see particularly cold snaps. And then on top of that, we look at the impact to our farmers, for example. We're going through this really hot, dry period, and then if we get one day of rain, it won't be enough because it just won't soak into the ground. So they need a sustained period of water. Now that, of course, it'll be very frustrating for other people running events and all those other things during the summer, but the reality is we need a balanced climate, and all of our crops are designed to have a certain amount of water versus heat versus cold, and we're seeing a period where we will have to change and innovate and start to think, well, actually, what can we grow on the island? All those things require change. They require quite a lot of lead-in. So anything we can do to mitigate those climate changes and the temperature changes, from my perspective, it's no-brainer. But I think we have to think beyond ourselves. Of course, I think we all quite like having a few days of sunshine, but there are consequences to that, and I think it's just about a balance with all of this. And it's not so simple as to think there are no consequences to having a week of really hot sunshine.
And I suppose the other thing that makes it more difficult, I mean, if you knew that this was the sort of summer that we're going to have every summer for the next 10, 15 years, as farmers, you would know what to plant. But if we go back just 2 summers ago, I don't think we had 2 dry days together. It was wet for most of the summer.
Yeah, and that uncertainty is hugely problematic. And of course, although we don't have the identical climate to the UK, the reality is we see fairly similar patterns. So at times when we need to bring in, for example, extra bedding or extra animal feed, there is a pressure and a demand already happening in the UK on that. And then we see real challenges with getting hold of product. Same with fertiliser. When there's a sudden increase in demand, because we need that here, well, actually the same increase is happening elsewhere. So then you see yourself impacted by prices going up, because there are people who will take the opportunity in a supply and demand economy. So there's all those other knock-on effects that are, again, outside our control. So anything that we can do that gives us a degree of control on the island, I just think is imperative that we do.
Douglas East MHK Claire Barber. The Chief Constable's report was debated in July's sitting. Here's the Home Affairs Minister.
Yes, we have just received the Chief Constable's annual report for 2025-26, and I think the contributions reflected the sheer volume of work and the success of the constabulary in what has been a particularly challenging reporting year because of not only the changing nature of our criminality, the wide variety of both criminal and social matters that the constabulary deal with, but the particular reporting year has seen a number of individual significant incidents which have put increased pressure on the operational resources of the constabulary.
Which is a great way to tee you up, Chief Constable. I mean, what are the pressures that you're dealing with at the moment?
Well, we've seen a significant increase in calls for service, but equally at the same time we've seen a 4.5% reduction in terms of recorded crime. And it just goes to show that the constabulary is not just focused on dealing with criminality. We've seen increased numbers of people who are in crisis, calls for service around mental health, and we've certainly embraced something called Right Care, Right Person, working with other partners with a view to making sure we have an appropriate tailored response to deal with people in crisis rather than criminalising them.
And what would you say are the highlights for you in the report?
Well, certainly a reduction in crime, a reduction in terms of the number of people killed on our roads, just 3, but that's 3 too many as far as I'm concerned. Our response to the quality of investigations around rape and serious sexual offences, absolutely outstanding. And certainly one individual working in that team has been recognised with the King's Police Medal. So I'm really proud of that. But that is reflective of the quality of individuals in that team. They have seen increases in demand brought about by changes in legislation, both around the Domestic Abuse Act, but also the Serious Offences Obscene Publications Act. But working with the department, wider government, we have seen greater investment in that particular area of business. So for me, that bodes well around enhancing that quality of service to some of the most vulnerable victims of crime. But equally, again, working with Manx Care, we've developed the Sexual Assault Referral Centre, And again, that's a state-of-the-art facility, so we're hoping that's going to build greater confidence with vulnerable victims to be forthcoming and work with us, supported again by Victim Support Isle of Man, to ensure that we optimise opportunities to progress these investigations through the courts and we get a positive outcome for the victim at the end of the day.
And of course the big thing that's about to happen to the Isle of Man is the Moneyval inspection, and part of your role is policing financial crime. I mean, do you have sufficient resource to do that?
Well, we do now. So we are an international financial centre. We've been working across the financial crime sector, both with regulators but other law enforcement and with the business as well, to optimise our opportunities to have a successful Moneyval evaluation at the back end of the year. There's been significant work undertaken across the partnership in terms of policies, procedures, but equally developing our working relationships across the piece as well. And I'm certainly a lot more confident than I was 3 years ago in terms of our position in readiness for Moneyval, and I'm looking forward to it.
You've got the Minister within earshot. If you had one thing that you currently don't have but would like to have, what would that be?
That's a difficult question, really. What I'd like to have? Well, certainly more resources. I think we could triple the number of officers within our serious and organised crime unit and still wouldn't have enough. However, I do fully understand some of the competing demands across government, and I'm really pleased with the investment that we've had for this financial year to the tune of £4.25 million. They have been reinvested into areas of criticality. You've just mentioned Moneyval. So we've seen circa £1.6 million invested into the proactive international money laundering investigation team. That's easy for me to say. But equally, within other areas of vulnerability, dealing with sex offenders and also victims of such crimes such as rape, serious sexual assaults.
The other element, the final word to the Minister, have to give the Minister the final word. Of course, the thing that certainly the Chief Minister has been focusing on, and I know you have too, is border security. Have we got enough now in place to deal with that?
It's as I said when I was talking about a number of areas, they remain ongoing in that a huge amount has been done. The merger of the Ports Policing Unit into the Constabulary was a major step forward. There is now co-location to enable increased collaboration and cooperation between the Constabulary incorporating Ports Policing but also Customs and Immigration officers. And the report itself indicates that the work to have an immigration compliance team that actively focuses on enforcement matters has seen now some arrests this year, more arrests around immigration criminality. But I don't say that the work is complete because as we develop our capability, technology and understanding of our role within the common travel area and our ability to be a good citizen within the common travel area and take responsibility for security and addressing criminality, I believe that there will be continued work that we will need. However, what I am confident about is that we will be evidence-led, so we will understand through intelligence, through good collaborative working, what is required, and we will be very targeted and focused, as we have been so far, on what needs to be put in place and how to prioritise resourcing that against the other pressures and areas that also are apt to be considered for resource.
Middle MHK Jane Poole-Wilson there. Finally, Joni Farragher had a question to the Chief Minister. You had a question on the recent Bloomberg report into the activities of King Gaming in the Isle of Man. What was your motivation in asking that question?
Really, it's because I'd had a series of emails through from constituents requesting that I put some thought into this, and those constituents had sent me the text of the article, which I hadn't read up till then because it is behind a paywall. And I think that might potentially be why there hasn't been as much awareness raised about the issues that the Bloomberg investigation raises, because it is behind a paywall. So I was keen to represent those constituents in the first instance, but also because the article and the investigation does raise significant and serious questions about regulatory framework that the island runs under, and the governmental policy and oversight of the sector. So I thought that it was just really important to raise awareness of the issue and to see if the government was going to look into its own actions on this.
Because some of the things that are suggested in the article is that senior officers who are on one day responsible for controlling the activities of organisations like King Gaming, a few weeks later were on the other side working for King Gaming. I mean, is that something that you're concerned about?
So yeah, I mean, I do have serious concerns, but my point in bringing this up was not so much to look at allegations of individual wrongdoing, but obviously the fact that the report, the investigation, names individuals who are in this government does mean that I think it strengthens the case for an independent review into this. And it's not preempting the outcome of that review. Hopefully it would find that it might show some lessons learned, but hopefully it would find that there wasn't any deliberate conflicts there, and there wasn't any deliberate kind of actions that knew that they shouldn't have taken place.
Because there is, I mean, I used that example, there's no suggestion that there was anything wrong in terms of what employment law says and what government policy says in terms of someone working for one organisation and then working for a different organisation. But I suppose an investigation would consider all these all the things that have happened and come to a conclusion as to whether it should be okay to do that or not. There is, though, an ongoing criminal investigation, so it makes it quite difficult to set up an independent inquiry at this stage.
I don't agree, actually. I think it's absolutely reasonable and happens in other jurisdictions regularly that a criminal investigation runs alongside a independent inquiry into the actions of government. That's not at all an unprecedented situation, and is completely standard in other jurisdictions. So what the criminal investigation will look at is, is there any elements of criminality around this? They will look at whether there were offences that had taken place, and they will be looking to prosecute if there were, whereas an independent inquiry into government's actions just looks at the regulatory framework, looks at the policy, and how we arrived at that policy, which is another cause for concern, and how that policy was indicated to the island and was given oversight by politicians or otherwise. And it looks at the government decisions that were taken, and that's entirely appropriate to run alongside a criminal investigation.
The other thing that you were doing in Tynwald was moving the report, let me get the title right, the Select Committee of Tynwald on Poverty first report of the session 25-26, Child Poverty, Education and Health Solutions, and it ran to 26 recommendations, and we're not going to go through them all, but I suppose the first question is what was the evidence that you found during this current investigation?
So the main hub of the evidence around which all of our recommendations revolved was that the free school meals data that we were provided by all of the island's schools showed that children in receipt of free school meals consistently do poorly compared to their counterparts who aren't on free school meals. That's something that is absolutely baked into our system. It is persistent. It has been occurring for decades, and it is visible across the island schools. And that really does fire up a passion in me. You know, I think that children who are in receipt of free school meals, so therefore obviously in the lower end of the income spectrum shouldn't have that reflected in their grades. And I think it's really, really important that we get on top of this, because poverty is cyclical. It's really hard cycle to break, and it does limit our outcomes. It limits the way that we engage in society. So breaking that cycle for today's children has a huge impact, not just on those individual children, the most important thing to me, but also in terms of societal outcomes and keeping people in stable work and therefore having government income, etc. It's huge for all of us.
And I do know that your work is prompting teachers, senior management teams across the education system to be more aware of this. And I've spoken to a few teachers who've said that yes, this is quite shocking to when you actually see the data, that effectively, if you come from an impoverished background, income-wise at least, you are less likely to do well, and that's not going to change as a result of going through the education process, which it must be a concern to everybody.
Well, that's it exactly. The data is very shocking. I'll have to. That's the only word that I can use. When I saw it, it was so glaring. The difference is so glaring. It made me feel quite upset, to be totally honest. And I think the fact that we're not addressing that, the evidence that was given by the Department of Education, Sport and Culture showed really that there isn't any initiatives, there is no overarching plan to close that gap. And I think that's why scrutiny work is really important, because showing that glaring gap and trying to work to addressing that with the help of the department who have accepted most of our recommendations and worked with us on their amendments, and we really do thank them for that. But with the help of them, realising that there is this gap, there is that omission in provision, and it's something that we all really want to address.
So then, in terms of the recommendations, I mean, there are 26 of them. What are what's the core thrust of the recommendations, without going through all the detail?
So I think I'd say mainly that what they are saying is that they're mainly for the Department of Education, Sport and Culture, with a few for the Department of Health and Social Care. But mainly what they are saying is that we need to be aware of this gap and we need to be working towards closing it. That's utilising quite a range of recommendations, really, and sort of levers. So, for example, we've looked at early help and support. We've looked at models such as the Planet Youth model in order to offset the impact of adverse childhood experiences and poverty.
And the Planet Youth model?
So the Planet Youth model is an Icelandic model that looks at reducing young people's involvement with life-changing decisions that usually occur in early teenage years. What our evidence showed in our report was that whilst children who come from poorer households aren't necessarily less able in terms of attainment and academic achievement, they will have exposure to more risk-taking behaviour from early on, whether that be from within the household or from the area in which they live. So they will tend to engage more in younger alcohol consumption, etc., risk-taking behaviour effectively. And the Icelandic model looks to reduce that and looks to bring it down. Now, the reason that we looked at Planet Youth is simply about its proven track record of effectiveness. It really has had some amazing results on the countries that have bought into it, which includes Scotland. So, I think we just wanted to flag that as a kind of flagship model. But whatever model we do end up with, as long as it has the same impact, I think we'd all be comfortable with that.
The other thing that was remarkable about this was government came forward with a series of amendments, and the committee accepted the amendments and everything went through unanimously.
Oh yeah, don't we love a little bit of parliamentary unity? That was because both the committee members and the ministers involved, Minister Christian, Minister Kane and Mrs Kelsey, representing the DHSC, had met with us and taken their time, taken all of our time to meet together to try to come to an agreement. So the initial amendments produced by the Council of Ministers were discussed, and some of them we didn't agree with, some of them we wanted to change, and we actually came to an agreement around that table. So it's to do with that collaborative approach and everybody wanting to actually find an amenable solution to everyone here, and I think we were all comfortable with where we landed.
Politicians talking to each other and coming up with solutions that meet everyone's needs. That'll never catch on.
It'll never catch on, will it? No, I mean, let's hope that it does. Let's hope that we see more of it, because it was lovely to have that debate and to hear people's positivity, really, around the recommendations and around what we want to do for children and families, because that's where we need to always come back to. The children who are involved in this, the children who are born into the circumstances that are completely outside of their control.
That was Douglas East MHK Joni Ferriger. So what do you think? The statistics on educational attainment for children from less well-off backgrounds are quite shocking, so it's hard not to agree that more should be done to help them. Do you support the Moor Vannon wind farm, or are you on the side of the protesters? For a full list of Keys candidates, visit Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gaughan. Got a mouse on Geistachrum. Thanks for listening.